On to Mesopotamia. We know something about Mesopotamia, don't we? It's Greek for the land between two rivers. It lies between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which flow into the Persian Gulf, and that, of course, is modern-day Iraq, that particular area. In the upper reaches, quote, in the upper reaches where the rivers lie far apart, the country is hilly and rolling, lots of hills. This region is watered by a number of major tributaries of the great streams, as well as by winter rain, especially in the hills where early farmers raised their crops. The southern part, from the point where the rivers come close together and then diverge, was the home of the first civilizations. Here rain falls rarely, but in sudden storms. For water, men must depend mainly on the rivers. It goes on for a bit about the religions, the different gods, doesn't matter. In its natural state, Lower Mesopotamia is a wild waste of dried mud flats, stagnant pools, and reed swamps. It's a pretty flat area, and every once in a while you get a big flood, 10-year, 20-year, or 100-year flood that would make massive areas, low-lying areas, into lakes, which would then dry up slowly. And do this again and again and again over thousands and thousands of years, and you've got a big swampy flat area with big salty lake marshes that sometimes get filled up with water, and then they dry out over 20 or 30 or 40 years and get filled up again. Apart from the clay, there are no building materials nor any sources of metals. Of course, here you are way down from the mountains are way up there, and the lightest stuff gets washed down and the heavier stuff gets stuck higher up, and so you're down here at the bottom of this delta that's filled in with the lightest silt, and a whole bunch of lightweight silt put together makes clay, which is a rather heavy substance. As all the other stuff that's any heavier has been buried. So this entire area is actually free of stone, even. But very good rich clay in which to farm. So this district offered little to men save its soil, which in most areas was easily worked and a constant source of water in the great rivers. The early farming settlers had to draw off water from the high bed of the Euphrates River to irrigate their fields, and then drain away this water, lest the salts which it brought ruin the land even for barley. The floods of the rivers, which came irregular, so let's pause right there and mention that about draining things away. I said to my dad, I know that in ancient Mesopotamia the land was drained. They had to drain it. Some of it that wasn't drained eventually became very salty and was ruined. And therefore some of that ancient area, which used to be quite productive, is now unproductive because of the lack of drainage. And I said, we've been irrigating this valley that we live in here for generations now. What's going to happen with it? And he said, well, it started to get waterlogged in the 1920s, and they put in the drain system. Oh, okay. Which I know about, but I never put the two together. So it's a problem we haven't solved even today. You just have to have the water, it has to go over, the plants have to drink what they can, the water runs out, drains on the side, and gets carried off, because the salts will stay in the water. Salts will be washed away, as it were. If you just bring the water in and then it evaporates, then the salts are left behind, and that very quickly builds up. Okay. The floods of the rivers, which came irregularly in the late spring as crops were maturing, these floods came late in the spring. Crops are about ready to harvest. You don't need to water right now. You do not need to water them right now. Useless. The floods on the Nile come just perfect. You get the nice big flood, you immediately plant your grain, or is it vice versa? So absolutely useless the floods were in Mesopotamia. They had to be warded off by further extensive labors of diking and walling. So where in Egypt you just rebuild the dikes and stuff after the flood comes and then let the stuff grow, in Mesopotamia you've got to specifically keep everything under control with constant dikes and ditching. Once farmers had learned how to exploit the potential fertility of the land, nonetheless, they could expand their numbers greatly and could also produce a surplus to support non-farmers who created the complex structure of civilization. Another significant geographical aspect of Mesopotamia is its openness. Now, it talks about the fact that to the south and the west are just big open deserts. And there are a constant stream of people coming in off these deserts, nomadic peoples who lived with their herds, traveling around with their herds, and a constant stream of people who there wasn't enough room for them in that lifestyle. They didn't want that lifestyle. They were attracted to the city lifestyle. Constant stream of people coming in off of there. And they had become the ruling element by the time of Hammurabi. To the east and the north, you have mountains. That's the general geography of the Euphrates here. East and north mountains, south and west are vast open deserts. They would go up the river to the mountains for wood. They didn't have any vast trees or anything. All they had was reeds down below. For trees and lumber and stuff, you have to go north. For wood, for metal, for stone even. Sometimes the only piece of stone in somebody's house was at their door, for the hinge of the door to slide on. That they had just a doorknob stone. That was the only piece of stone in a person's house sometimes. And other resources. Mesopotamian civilization was far more receptive of external influence, and it spread its achievements more widely over the Near East than did the secluded population of early Egypt. Now, Egypt didn't have many places to go, into the Sinai Desert, or into the Sahara Desert, or up the rough upper stretches of the Nile into, what is it, Namibia? So they didn't have many directions to go except possibly south, but not even that, because south was less civilized than Egypt was. They were kind of locked in and became sort of docile in that way. Okay. Farming villages seem to have begun the difficult task of domesticating lower Mesopotamia, closer down to the Persian Gulf shores. They began that by 4000 BC, whereas 6000 BC and so on, upwards. It took 2,000 years to get all this river valley even used. In the regions close to the Persian Gulf, it was easiest to make use of the water without extensive irrigation works, and here a number of settlements developed rapidly. Just pause to make a note that if there are vast floods, this is the lowest lying area. The area is worst hit by floods. Up higher, where the riverbed is deeper and the channel is more swift, the floods are less likely to flood out and cause huge, massive areas to be engulfed in water. So there's pluses and minuses. Less work on the irrigation, more danger during floods. Anyways, while the creation of the food raising economy had been a slow process, the appearance of civilization took place almost in an explosion once the mass of population had reached a critical point in size and internal organization. Cities appeared in Mesopotamia during a few centuries just before 3000 BC. So, agriculture and the settling down into towns takes a few hundred years, and then a couple thousand years later we take the next step of these towns jumping these barriers to cities, civilizations. Quote, each city with its surrounding fields constituted an independent country which is no bigger than a modern American county. Pause there for half a second. The county I live in Utah, is the size of the state of Connecticut, so there's a lot of variation within that. Anyways, within the city, the priests appear at first to have been directing elements, but there are hints that all free males formed an assembly which made final judgments. I wonder what the evidence for that is, what the hints of that are. I doubt it somehow. That's just a natural... I mean, I think the most natural thing for people to do is for them to just accept what an authority figure says. Probably ancient credulous idiots in the rising civilizations were more credulous than you and I would think, and more willing to just believe priests or leaders or whatever. And I don't think that they would very long maintain that habit of saying we have to have a say. Why should you have to have a say? I know what God says. Oh, well then I better shut up. I think that's much more likely than that